Montana Territory, 1873. A relentless winter wind howled across the vast plains, carrying with it the promise of an early blizzard. Rider Ashcroft pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his lean frame as he guided his chestnut stallion through the gathering storm. At 25, he'd already spent 7 years riding the range, and every one of those years had taught him the same harsh lesson. A man survived alone in these untamed lands, or he didn't survive at all. Rider's handsome face, square-jawed with alert blue eyes beneath a shock of dark hair, remained impassive as he scanned the horizon. The fading daylight caught the light stubble on his cheeks, the only concession to the weeks he'd spent tracking a herd of mustangs through the foothills. His father's dying words still echoed in his mind. "Trust no one but your horse and your gun, son. Everything else in this territory will take from you until there's nothing left." He'd lived by those words, keeping to himself, moving from ranch to ranch, working cattle drives that took him from Texas to Montana and back again. Rider had convinced himself that the ache of loneliness was simply the price of survival in a land where sentiment was as dangerous as a rattlesnake. The few cowboys who'd brought wives to these parts had watched them wither from hardship or flee back east. The ones who'd fallen for local women often ended up with knives in their backs or bullets in their hearts when rivalries turned deadly. No room for love out here, Rider muttered to his horse as the first snowflakes began to fall. What he wanted was simple. Enough money to buy his own spread someday, land that couldn't be taken from him, a place where he answered to no man. What he needed? Well, that was a question he refused to consider. The snow thickened, obscuring the trail. Rider estimated he was still 10 miles from the nearest town when he spotted a thin plume of smoke rising from behind a stand of cottonwoods. Caution made him reach for his Winchester, but desperation, knowing what a night in this weather would mean, drove him forward. As he rounded the trees, he saw a small covered wagon with one wheel clearly broken, tilting sadly toward the ground. A campfire sputtered in the snow, and beside it stood a young woman furiously trying to secure a tarpaulin over the wagon's exposed side. "Hello, the camp," he called out, not wanting to startle her. She whirled around, and Rider felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a jolt that had nothing to do with the biting cold. She was perhaps 20 years old, with honey-blonde hair escaping from beneath a woolen cap. Her green eyes narrowed with suspicion as she raised a shotgun with practiced ease. "State your business," she called, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor Rider could see in her shoulders. "Just passing through, ma'am. Storm's coming fast. Thought you might need help with that wheel." He remained in his saddle, hands visible. "Name's Rider Ashcroft. Dahlia Donovan," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "And I don't need help. I've managed on my own since St. Louis." The wind gusted, nearly extinguishing her small fire. Dahlia glanced at the darkening sky with poorly concealed worry, then back at Rider. "That will says otherwise," he observed quietly. "Storm like this, you'll freeze by morning." Before she could respond, the tarpaulin she'd been securing ripped free in a violent gust, exposing the wagon's contents to the swirling snow. Dahlia let out a frustrated cry and lunged for the flapping canvas. It was the moment that changed everything, the instant that challenged everything Rider thought he knew about survival in the West. Instead of riding on, instead of leaving another soul to the mercy of the frontier, he dismounted and strode toward her wagon. "Let me help," he said, taking hold of the wildly flapping tarpaulin. "Then I'll be on my way." But as the storm descended in earnest, transforming the world into a howling white void, both knew that Rider wouldn't be leaving that night. The frontier had thrust them together in a way neither could have anticipated, opening a question neither wanted to face. Could two solitary souls find shelter in each other when the world around them offered none? "I'm not naive about frontier hospitality," Dahlia said sharply as Rider secured the last corner of the tarpaulin. "I've got this shotgun, and I know how to use it." The snow was falling so heavily now that Rider could barely see 10 feet beyond the campfire. "Ma'am, with respect, I've got more reason to fear that weather than your shotgun. How about a truce until morning?" Reluctantly, she nodded. As they huddled by the fire, she explained that she was traveling to Whitefish to take ownership of her late uncle's general store. The wagon driver she'd hired had abandoned her 2 days back, taking his team, but leaving her with the wagon and her possessions. Said there was word of Blackfoot raids, she explained, her delicate jaw set with determination. I told him that was 50 miles north, but he wouldn't listen. Left me with one old mule that died yesterday. As they talked through the night, taking turns feeding the fire against the howling storm, Ryder began to see something in Dahlia that disturbed his carefully constructed worldview. She was no wilting flower, but a woman with practical intelligence and fierce independence. She'd been a schoolteacher in St. Louis, but after her parents died of influenza, she decided to claim her inheritance and make a new life. Most women would have sold the store from afar, Ryder observed, passing her a tin cup of coffee. Most women haven't had to start over with nothing, she replied, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. Besides, I've read about the Montana Territory my whole life. I want to see if the reality matches my dreams. It doesn't, he said flatly. Dreams don't survive out here. Dahlia studied him over the rim of her cup. And who taught you that, Mr. Ashcroft? The question lingered between them, unanswered but not forgotten, as they eventually sought what sleep they could find in the bitter cold night. When morning came, the world had transformed into a pristine white landscape. The storm had passed, but 3 feet of snow blanketed everything in sight. Ryder emerged from his bedroll to find Dahlia already awake, attempting to assess the damage to her wagon wheel. It's beyond repair, he told her after a brief inspection, and your supplies won't last until the snow melts. Dahlia's face remained composed, but he could see the calculation in her eyes. What do you suggest? There's a ranch about 5 miles west. The Thompsons. Good people. I worked for them last spring. We could make it there on my horse. Come back for your things when the weather clears. And why would you help me? She asked, wariness evident in her stance. Ryder found himself without an easy answer. His father's warnings echoed in his mind. Yet something about leaving this woman to the mercy of the winter felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Let's just say I wouldn't sleep while knowing I left someone to freeze, he finally replied. Their journey to the Thompson Ranch became the first test of an unlikely partnership. With Dahlia seated behind him on his stallion, her arms hesitantly wrapped around his waist, Ryder navigated the snow-laden landscape. The proximity was unfamiliar, unsettling, a reminder of the human connection he'd deliberately avoided for years. You ride like someone running from something, Dahlia observed as they paused to rest the horse. Everyone out here is running from something, he deflected. Or towards something, she countered. The Thompsons welcomed them with the easy hospitality of frontier people who understood the value of cooperation in harsh lands. Martha Thompson, a robust woman with graying hair and kind eyes, took one look at Dahlia's city clothes and immediately offered her daughter's outgrown dresses. Can't have you freezing to death in those flimsy things, she declared, steering Dahlia toward the house. Jacob Thompson, a weathered rancher in his 50s, nodded appreciatively when Ryder explained the situation. Good man. Winter like this, we all look out for each other. He clapped Ryder on the shoulder. Heard the rocking Jay is hiring hands for spring. You planning to stay in the territory? Never planned that far ahead, Ryder answered automatically, but his eyes drifted to the farmhouse where Dahlia had disappeared. That evening, gathered around the Thompson family table, Ryder watched with growing fascination as Dahlia charmed the entire household. She helped with dinner, told stories that made the Thompson children laugh, and displayed an adaptability that belied her refined appearance. When Jacob mentioned trouble with his accounting ledgers, Dahlia offered to review them, revealing a sharp mind for numbers. My uncle's store will need proper books, she explained. I've been studying business management since I decided to come west. Later, as Ryder sat on the porch despite the cold, Dahlia joined him, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Thank you, she said simply. You could have ridden past yesterday. Almost did, he admitted. Why didn't you? The question hung between them, demanding a truth Ryder wasn't ready to acknowledge. He shrugged instead. Like I said, couldn't leave you to freeze. She studied him in the moonlight. Mr. Ashcroft, I think you're not nearly as callous as you pretend to be. Before he could respond, a gunshot split the night. Jacob burst onto the porch, rifle in hand, as a rider approached at full gallop. Rustlers, the man shouted, reining his horse to a stop. They've hit the Davis place, and they're headed this way. The next few hours passed in tense preparation. The Thompsons and their neighbors had faced cattle thieves before, but rarely in winter when survival depended on every head of livestock. As the men organized a defense, Dahlia stunned them all by checking and loading a rifle with practiced ease. My father believed daughters should know how to protect themselves, she explained, meeting Ryder's surprised gaze. I'm not just a schoolteacher, Mr. Ashcroft. When dawn broke, the rustlers came, 6 hard-faced men who clearly hadn't expected an organized resistance. In the brief, violent exchange that followed, Ryder found himself fighting alongside Dahlia, who proved as good as her word with a rifle. Her steady aim drove 2 rustlers back, while Ryder and the others engaged the rest. It ended as quickly as it began, with the rustlers retreating and one of their number wounded. As the adrenaline faded, Ryder found Dahlia staring at her hands, which had begun to tremble. First time in a real fight? He asked quietly. She nodded. Books don't prepare you for the reality. Few things do, he agreed, then surprised himself by adding, you did well. Better than most men I've known. The shared danger created a bond between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. When the snow began to melt a week later, Ryder organized an expedition to retrieve Dahlia's wagon and belongings. Working together with the Thompson men, they transferred her possessions to a borrowed wagon and prepared for the journey to Whitefish. You'll need protection on the road, Ryder found himself saying the night before their planned departure. I'm headed north anyway. Could escort you to Whitefish. Dahlia looked up from her mending, a small smile playing at her lips. And here I thought you preferred to travel alone, Mr. Ashcroft. Ryder, he corrected. And sometimes circumstances change a man's habits. The journey to Whitefish took 4 days through muddy, thawing trails. Each night around the campfire, the barriers between them lowered further. Ryder found himself telling her about his childhood on a failing Texas ranch, his father's bitter decline after his mother's death, and his years of wandering the frontier. Dahlia shared her dreams for the store, her determination to build something lasting, and her secret fear that she might not be strong enough for the life she'd chosen. Yet here you are, halfway across the country, facing down rustlers and blizzards, Ryder observed. Seems plenty strong to me. There's different kinds of strength, she replied softly. The kind that helps you survive, and the kind that helps you live. Her eyes met his across the flames. I think you have the first kind in abundance, but maybe you've forgotten about the second. Her words haunted him as they approached Whitefish, a growing settlement that served as a supply point for the surrounding ranches and mining operations. The town boasted a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, including Donovan's General Store, a sturdy 2-story structure with living quarters above the shop. It's bigger than I expected, Dahlia breathed, taking in her inheritance with wide eyes. The storekeeper who'd been maintaining the place in the interim, a bespectacled older man named Hiram Foster, greeted them with evident relief. Miss Donovan, we'd begun to fear the worst when you didn't arrive on schedule. He handed her a ring of keys. Everything's just as your uncle left it, though I took the liberty of ordering spring inventory. As Dahlia explored her new domain, Ryder found himself lingering, postponing his departure hour by hour. He helped unload her possessions, arranged the heavier furniture, and even repaired a leak in the roof, all while telling himself he'd leave tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and still he stayed, drawn into Dahlia's orbit as she transformed the dusty store into something reflecting her own vision. She added a reading corner with books she'd brought from St. Louis, reorganized the merchandise for efficiency, and instituted a fair credit system for local ranchers and miners. Most stores out here would charge double for credit, Ryder observed one evening as she worked on her ledgers. And drive away half their customers, she countered. I'd rather have loyal patrons who know they're treated fairly. Word spread quickly about the new proprietress of Donovan's General Store. Women from town and surrounding homesteads came first out of curiosity, then returned for Dahlia's warm welcome and fair prices. Men followed, some clearly more interested in the beautiful shopkeeper than her merchandise. Watching a local rancher named Samuel Preston flirting with Dahlia one afternoon, Ryder felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. When Preston invited her to the upcoming Founders' Day dance, that tightness transformed into something darker. You planning to attend? Ryder asked later, his tone carefully neutral as he stocked shelves in the back room. I should make an appearance, Dahlia replied, sorting through a shipment of fabric. It's good for business to be part of the community. Preston seems eager to show you around, Ryder observed, unable to keep a hint of tension from his voice. Dahlia paused, a bolt of calico in her hands. Mr. Preston is a customer, nothing more. Her eyes met his with unexpected directness. "Why do you ask?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to voice. Before Ryder could respond, the door opened, bringing new customers, and the moment passed. That night, as Ryder lay on his bedroll in the store's back room, a temporary arrangement that had somehow stretched into weeks, he confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Dahlia Donovan. The realization terrified him more than any gunfight or blizzard ever had. Love made men weak, vulnerable. His father had been a strong, capable rancher until his mother died. After that, he'd been a shell, drowning his grief in whiskey, losing their land piece by piece. Ryder had sworn never to follow that path. Yet here he was, contemplating a future that included something beyond solitary survival. The Founders' Day dance arrived, transforming Whitefish's modest town hall into a lantern-lit celebration of frontier resilience. Despite his misgivings, Ryder found himself attending, standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering in his one decent shirt. His breath caught when Dahlia entered, wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes, her honey-blonde hair arranged in an elegant knot. She moved through the crowd with natural grace, greeting neighbors and customers. When Preston claimed her for the first dance, Ryder felt that now familiar tightness return. He was about to leave when an unexpected voice stopped him. "Mr. Ashcroft." Martha Thompson appeared beside him, her shrewd eyes taking in his expression. "Didn't expect to see you at a social gathering." "Just passing time," he muttered. She watched Dahlia dancing. "That girl's making quite an impression. Already had 3 business proposals and 2 marriage offers, according to the gossip." Ryder's jaw tightened. "She's capable of making her own decisions." "Indeed she is," Martha agreed. "But sometimes even capable people need a little clarity about what's in front of them." Her gaze was knowing. "Or who?" Before Ryder could respond, the music ended. As Preston led Dahlia toward the refreshment table, Ryder found himself moving across the floor, surprising himself as much as Dahlia when he appeared before her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Surprise flickered across Dahlia's face, followed by pleasure. "I'd be delighted." As they moved across the floor, Ryder was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit in his arms, how natural it felt despite his lack of practice. "I didn't know you danced," Dahlia murmured. "I'm full of surprises," he replied, managing a small smile. "Yes," she agreed, her eyes searching his. "You certainly are." The evening might have marked a turning point, had fate not intervened. As the dance ended, the town marshal burst through the doors. "Stage was robbed 10 miles south," he announced. "Drivers wounded. Looking for volunteers to track the bandits." Ryder stepped forward immediately, along with several other men. As they prepared to ride out, he found Dahlia at his side. "Be careful," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Always am," he promised. Then, yielding to an impulse he couldn't explain, he added, "Save a dance for me when I get back." The posse tracked the stage robbers into the mountains, following a trail that grew increasingly difficult in the spring mud. 3 men turned back after the first day, but Ryder pressed on with the marshal and 2 others. On the 3rd day, they cornered the bandits in a narrow canyon. The ensuing gunfight was brief but vicious. When it ended, 2 robbers were dead, 1 wounded, and the 4th had surrendered. The stolen strongbox was recovered, but the cost had been high. Ryder took a bullet in his left shoulder. "Need to get you to a doctor," the marshal said as he bound the wound. "You've lost a lot of blood." The journey back to Whitefish was a blur of pain and fever dreams. In his delirium, Ryder called Dahlia's name, confessing feelings he'd never dared voice while conscious. The marshal exchanged knowing glances with the others, but said nothing. News of the posse's return reached Whitefish before they did. Dahlia was waiting at the doctor's house when they carried Ryder in, her face pale with worry. "He'll live," Dr. Wilson assured her after examining the wound. "But he'll need proper care. Fever's the danger now." "I'll take care of him," Dahlia said without hesitation. "The store can manage without me for a few days." For 3 days and nights, she barely left Ryder's side, bathing his fevered brow, changing bandages, and coaxing broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. In his fevered state, Ryder's defenses crumbled. He spoke of his fears, his loneliness, and sometimes, when the fever burned highest, of his growing love for her. "Don't know if I'm strong enough," he murmured during one such episode. Don't know if I can protect what I love. Father couldn't. Shoo. Dahlia soothed, her cool hand on his forehead. You don't have to be strong alone anymore. When the fever finally broke on the fourth day, Ryder awoke to find Dahlia asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand still holding his. The sight filled him with a complex mixture of emotions, tenderness, fear, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. As he stirred, she woke immediately, relief washing over her features. You're back, she said simply. Seems so, he replied, his voice rough from disuse. How long? For days. She poured him water, helping him drink. The marshal caught the last bandit. The strongbox had payroll for the lumber camp. They're calling you heroes. Ryder grimaced. Wasn't trying to be a hero. No, she agreed with a small smile. Just doing what needed doing. It's your way. During his convalescence, Dahlia moved Ryder to the rooms above her store. His recovery was slow but steady, and with each passing day, the walls he'd built around himself crumbled further. He found himself talking about possibilities he'd never considered, staying in one place, putting down roots, building something lasting. The Rocking J is still hiring, he mentioned one evening as they sat on the small balcony behind her store, watching the sunset. Foreman's position. Year-round work. That's only 5 miles from town, Dahlia observed, not looking at him directly. You'd have to give up wandering. Been thinking maybe wandering's overrated, he admitted. Gets lonely. Her eyes met his then, full of questions she didn't voice. Before she could respond, a commotion in the street drew their attention. A group of riders had arrived, their manner suggesting trouble. That's Samuel Preston, Dahlia said, recognizing the lead rider. And those men with him aren't from around here. Preston spotted them on the balcony and pointed. There he is. That's Ashcroft. Ryder's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but it wasn't there. He was still too weak to carry it. Get inside, he told Dahlia. Something's wrong. But it was too late. Preston and his companions had already entered the store below, their heavy boots pounding on the stairs. When they burst onto the balcony, Preston's face was twisted with rage. Rider Ashcroft, he spat. Or should I say, Ryder Allen? Thought you could hide forever, didn't you? Ryder went very still, his eyes darting to Dahlia, who looked confused. I don't know what you're talking about, Preston. My brother recognized you from that dance. Preston's voice shook with anger. You rode with Jessup's gang in Wyoming 5 years ago. Robbed the bank in Laramie. My father was the teller you shot. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Dahlia's face drained of color as she looked between the men. I never shot anyone in Laramie, Ryder said carefully. Or robbed any bank. Liar, Preston snarled. We've wired the marshal in Cheyenne. There's a wanted poster with your face on it. $500 reward. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ryder's feet. Not because the accusation was true, it wasn't, but because he recognized the name. Jessup's gang had terrorized Wyoming territory years ago, and one of the outlaws had indeed been named Rider Allen. The resemblance had caused Ryder trouble once before, but he'd thought the matter long resolved when the Rider Allen was reported killed in Colorado. This is a mistake, he said firmly. I can prove I was working cattle in Texas when those robberies happened. Tell it to the judge, Preston snapped. Marshal's on his way. We're just making sure you don't disappear again. Throughout the confrontation, Dahlia had remained silent, her expression unreadable. Now, she stepped forward. Mr. Preston, this is my property. Unless you have legal authority to detain Mr. Ashcroft, I'll thank you to leave. Preston's eyes narrowed. Miss Donovan, with respect, you don't know what kind of man you're harboring. He's a killer. I know exactly what kind of man he is, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. And I know that in America, a man is innocent until proven guilty. Now please leave, or I'll have to involve the town marshal myself. Reluctantly, Preston and his men withdrew, but not before promising to keep watch on the store. When they were gone, Dahlia turned to Ryder, her composure finally cracking. Is it true? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, he answered without hesitation. But there was an outlaw with my first name and a similar appearance. I heard he died years ago in Colorado. Then we need to prove it, Dahlia said, practical even in crisis. Do you have anyone who can vouch for your whereabouts during those robberies? Ryder thought carefully. My former boss in Texas. A few cowboys I rode with. But getting word to them will take time. Time we don't have, Dahlia concluded. The marshal from Cheyenne could arrive within days. That night, as Ryder lay awake contemplating his options, he heard soft footsteps approaching his door. Dahlia entered without knocking, a determined expression on her face. "We need to leave," she said simply, "until we can clear your name." "We?" Ryder sat up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Dahlia, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," she interrupted. "I'm offering. I have savings, and I know people in St. Louis who can help verify your story." Her eyes held his in the dim light. "Unless you'd rather face this alone." The question pierced straight to the heart of Ryder's deepest fear, that loving someone meant inevitable loss and pain. Yet here was Dahlia, offering partnership when most would have shown him the door. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of strength and vulnerability. "No," he said quietly. "I don't want to face it alone. Not anymore." By dawn, they had packed essential supplies and slipped out the back of the store. Using back trails to avoid Preston's men, they headed east, away from Whitefish and the approaching marshal. Dahlia left a note for her assistant explaining her temporary absence and authorizing him to manage the store. "I hope I have a business to come back to," she remarked as they rode double on a horse Ryder had purchased from a nearby farm. "You will," he promised. "I'll make this right." Their journey took them through territory Ryder knew well, remote trails and hidden valleys where they could avoid the main roads. Despite the circumstances, he found an unexpected joy in traveling with Dahlia, in sharing the wild beauty of the frontier with someone who appreciated it as he did. At a small homestead where Ryder had once worked, they acquired a second horse and more supplies. The elderly couple who owned the place asked no questions beyond whether they needed help. "That's frontier hospitality," Ryder explained as they rode away. "Judge a person by their present need, not their past." "Is that why you helped me during the blizzard?" Dahlia asked. "Simple frontier hospitality?" Ryder glanced at her, riding confidently beside him. "Started that way," he admitted. "Became something else mighty quick." They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, the stars brilliant overhead. As they sat by the fire, Dahlia broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "We need to decide where we're going," she said. "Running without purpose won't solve anything." "I know a marshal in Denver," Ryder replied after a moment's thought. "Honest man. Helped me once before when I was mistaken for Alan. If anyone can sort this out officially, it's him." "Denver it is, then." Dahlia's practical nature asserted itself. "We'll need different names on the journey, just in case." "Mr. and Mrs. Smith?" Ryder suggested with a hint of humor. Dahlia's eyes widened slightly at the implication, but she recovered quickly. "How original," she said dryly. "But it will do." As they settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Ryder found himself wondering what it would be like if the pretense were real, if Dahlia were truly his wife, if they were traveling together not out of necessity, but choice. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. Their journey to Denver took them through increasingly populated areas where they had to maintain their charade as a married couple. They stayed at small inns and boarding houses, always alert for signs of pursuit. The forced proximity broke down the last barriers between them, leading to conversations that revealed their deepest fears and hopes. "I never thought I'd leave Whitefish so soon after arriving," Dahlia confessed one evening as they shared a simple meal in their room. "I had such plans for the store." "You'll go back," Ryder assured her. "This will pass." She studied him across the table. "And will you go back with me? Or will clearing your name mean returning to the trail?" The question cut to the heart of Ryder's internal struggle. Before meeting Dahlia, the answer would have been simple. The open trail had been his only home. Now, he found himself yearning for something he'd never thought possible. "If I had a reason to stay," he said carefully, "I might consider it." Dahlia held his gaze. "And what would constitute a sufficient reason, Mr. Ashcroft?" Before he could answer, shouts erupted in the street below, a commotion that instantly put them on alert. Peering cautiously through the curtains, Ryder saw a group of men showing papers to locals, one of which looked suspiciously like a wanted poster. "Bounty hunters," he whispered. "We need to move." They slipped out the back of the inn, retrieved their horses from the stable, and rode hard through the night. By dawn, they had reached the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where the terrain offered better hiding places but slower travel. "We're still 3 days from Denver," Ryder calculated as they made camp in a hidden ravine. "Assuming we can avoid those bounty hunters." Dahlia looked exhausted but determined as she unsaddled her horse. "We've come this far," she said simply. That night, a spring storm swept through the mountains, forcing them to share the limited shelter of a small cave. Huddled together against the cold, their proximity became both comfort and torment. "Why did you come with me?" Ryder asked suddenly, his voice barely audible above the rain. "You had everything to lose, nothing to gain." Dahlia was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Because when I came west, I was looking for more than just a store or a business. I was looking for a life with meaning." Her eyes met his in the darkness. "In you, I found someone who made me feel both safe and brave at the same time. That's worth risking everything for." Her honesty stripped away Ryder's last defenses. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home after years of wandering. When they separated, breathless and wondering, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I've been afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that loving someone meant losing everything, like my father did. But being with you makes me feel like I've found something instead." They reached Denver on the third day, making their way cautiously to the office of Marshal Thomas Blackburn. The marshal, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, recognized Ryder immediately. "Ashcroft," he greeted him with a firm handshake. "Heard you might be in trouble again." "Same trouble, different day," Ryder replied grimly. "Ryder Allen's ghost is haunting me." "That ghost became a lot more substantial recently," Blackburn said, gesturing for them to sit. "Allen's alive. Was captured in Santa Fe last month, escaped a week later. Now there are fresh wanted posters circulating, and your resemblance is causing problems again." The news hit Ryder like a physical blow. "So Preston wasn't entirely wrong," he muttered. "There is a wanted man with my name and face out there." "But it's not you," Dahlia insisted, placing her hand over his. "We can prove that." Marshal Blackburn studied them both thoughtfully. "It's good you came to me," he said finally. "I remember clearing this up 3 years ago, and I've got the documentation to prove it. Give me a day to wire the necessary authorities and get this straightened out." True to his word, Blackburn worked efficiently to resolve the case of mistaken identity. Within 48 hours, he had confirmation from Texas about Ryder's whereabouts during the Laramie robbery, as well as official acknowledgement from Wyoming that Rider Ashcroft and Ryder Allen were different men. "This should keep you from being arrested," the marshal said, handing Ryder official papers documenting his identity. "But it won't stop people from making the mistake. Allen's still out there, and you still look like him." "What would you suggest?" Ryder asked, sensing there was more. Blackburn leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, change your appearance. Grow a beard. Use your middle name. Settle somewhere people know you. The frontier has a long memory for faces, but a short one for context." As they prepared to leave Denver, Dahlia received a telegram from Whitefish. Her assistant reported that Preston had convinced several townspeople of Ryder's guilt, and sentiment had turned against him. The store was being boycotted by some of the larger ranchers. "I'm sorry," Ryder said as she folded the telegram. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Dahlia's chin lifted with characteristic determination. "Trouble passes. Truth remains." She took his hand. "But I need to return and set things right." The journey back to Whitefish was tense with anticipation. They rode openly now, carrying Marshal Blackburn's documentation and a letter of introduction to the local law enforcement. Yet Ryder couldn't shake the feeling that the matter wouldn't be resolved so easily. His instincts proved correct when they arrived at the outskirts of town to find a group of riders waiting for them, led by Preston and the town marshal. "That's far enough, Ashcroft," the marshal called, his hand hovering near his pistol. "You're wanted for questioning." Ryder reined his horse to a stop, his expression calm despite the churning in his gut. "I have documentation clearing my name," he announced, reaching slowly into his saddlebag. "From Marshal Blackburn in Denver." Preston's face darkened with anger. "Papers can be forged," he spat. "We know what you are." Dahlia urged her horse forward. "Mr. Preston, your anger is understandable but misdirected. The man who harmed your father is named Ryder Allen, not Ashcroft. He was captured in Santa Fe recently." "A convenient story," Preston sneered. "Enough," the town marshal intervened. He rode forward to examine the papers Ryder offered. After a long moment, he nodded. "These appear legitimate. I'll need to verify them with Denver, but until then, Ashcroft is free to go about his business. Preston's protest was immediate and loud, but the marshal silenced him with a sharp look. The law is the law, Samuel. If these papers are authentic, you've been pursuing an innocent man. The confrontation marked the beginning of a difficult period for Dahlia and Ryder. While the town marshal eventually confirmed the documentation, Preston's campaign had damaged Dahlia's business and Ryder's reputation. Some townspeople remained suspicious, others apologetic, and the community found itself divided. Through it all, Dahlia's determination never wavered. She reopened her store, welcomed customers with the same warmth as before, and gradually rebuilt trust. Ryder, now sporting a short beard as Blackburn had suggested, took the foreman's position at the Rocking J Ranch, proving his worth through hard work and fair dealing. One evening, as summer faded toward autumn, Ryder returned to Whitefish to find Dahlia closing the store after a busy day. Without preamble, he asked the question that had been growing in his heart since Denver. "Would you consider having dinner with me at the hotel restaurant tonight?" His voice was steady despite the hammering of his heart. "There's something important I'd like to discuss." Dahlia's smile held a hint of mischief. "That sounds suspiciously formal, Mr. Ashcroft." "Some occasions call for formality," he replied, offering his arm. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Whitefish, with white tablecloths and actual silverware. As they ate, Ryder found himself struggling to find the right words for what he needed to say. "You seem nervous," Dahlia observed after watching him rearrange his fork for the third time. "That's not like you." "Facing down rustlers is easier than this," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Then dinner?" she teased. "Then asking the woman I love to marry me," he replied, the words emerging before he could second-guess them. Dahlia's fork clattered against her plate, her green eyes wide with surprise. For a terrible moment, Ryder feared he'd misread everything between them. Then her face transformed with a joy so radiant it took his breath away. "You love me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered honestly. "You made me believe in something beyond survival. You showed me that the frontier doesn't have to be faced alone." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't have much to offer but my heart and my hands, but both are yours if you'll have them." Tears sparkled in Dahlia's eyes. "I've been hoping you'd ask," she confessed. "Ever since Denver." "Is that a yes?" Ryder pressed, hardly daring to believe. "Yes," she said, her smile brighter than any sunrise he'd ever witnessed. "1,000 times yes." They were married in October, when the aspen trees turned gold against the Montana sky. The ceremony, held in Whitefish's small church, was attended by the Thompsons, Ryder's colleagues from the Rocking J, and many of Dahlia's customers who had stood by her during the difficult times. Even Preston came, offering a grudging but sincere apology after the real Ryder Allen was recaptured in Colorado. "A man should admit when he's wrong," he said simply, shaking Ryder's hand at the reception. The newly married couple combined their resources to expand Donovan's general store, adding a second building for hardware and ranch supplies. Ryder continued working as foreman at the Rocking J, but invested his savings in land adjacent to town, where he began raising horses with a breeding pair gifted by Jacob Thompson. By the following spring, they had established a reputation as one of Whitefish's most successful partnerships, their complementary strengths creating something neither could have built alone. When Dahlia announced she was expecting their first child, Ryder's joy was tempered only by a momentary resurgence of his old fear. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked late one night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "What if I can't protect you both?" Dahlia turned to face him in the darkness. "You don't have to do it alone," she reminded him. "That's what you've taught me, that the frontier isn't about solitary survival, but about building something together that's stronger than what any of us could create alone." As the seasons turned and Montana territory grew towards statehood, Ryder and Dahlia Ashcroft built their legacy in Whitefish. Their daughter arrived in winter, followed by twin sons 2 years later. Their businesses prospered, and their home became known as a place of warmth and welcome in a land that could still be harsh and unforgiving. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with gold and purple. Ryder's arm encircled Dahlia's waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. Taking a chance on a wandering cowboy with trouble on his trail? Dahlia smiled up at him, the years having only enhanced her beauty in his eyes. Not for a single moment, she assured him. Some journeys aren't about the destination, but about who travels beside you. As their children's laughter drifted from inside the house, Ryder reflected on how far he'd come from the solitary rider who once believed the frontier was no place for love. In Dahlia, he had found not just a partner, but a home. Proof that even in the wildest places, the human heart could put down roots and flourish. The unexpected romance that began in a blizzard had transformed into the surest shelter either of them had ever known, stronger than any storm the frontier could summon.